effectively? It's something so many people face, right?
Absolutely. It's a huge challenge.
And finding solutions, things that actually work and aren't incredibly invasive, well, that search can feel pretty overwhelming.
It really can. Information overload is a real thing.
So for this deep dive, we're focusing on a really fascinating area of science that's showing, well, some very compelling potential. We're talking about photobiomodulation.
Exactly. We're going to explore how using specific types of light, red and near infrared light, can actually tap into our body's own processes to help with fat loss and maybe even improve metabolic function overall.
Think of it as like shining a light literally on some promising research.
That's a good way to put it.
And our focus today is pretty sharp.
Yeah.
We want to understand the science. How can these specific wavelengths of light, we're looking at studies using things around 635 nanometers and maybe up to 840 nanometers. How can they potentially contribute not just to, say, shrinking fat cells, but maybe also boosting metabolic weight loss?
Right, based on the positive research findings that are starting to come out.
And before we jump in too deep, just a bit of context. You might know MedWave provides this kind of photobiomodulation therapy.
Uh-huh. Using red and near infrared light administered by trained professionals.
Right. Now, their primary focus is on pain management. That's important to state.
Definitely.
But the science we're exploring today, the science behind how these light wavelengths work, it's directly relevant to the kind of technology they use. So our mission here is really to understand that underlying science.
Makes sense. And it starts with acknowledging that core problem, metabolic health and weight management are significant issues for a lot of people.
Yeah, and naturally, people are looking for effective options, ideally non-invasive ones.
Which leads us right back to photobiomodulation, or PBM, as it's often called.
Okay, so let's unpack PBM. It's non-invasive, uses red and near-infrared light, and you mentioned it's not totally new.
Not at all. It has a history, being used for things like reducing pain, helping wounds heal faster, cutting down inflammation. That's fairly well established.
But the fat loss and metabolic health angle? That's more recent.
That's the newer, really exciting area of investigation, yes. Researchers are looking at how it might impact cellulite, fat loss directly, even things like your blood lipid profile, cholesterol, triglycerides.
Okay, so how? How does shining this specific light on your body actually do anything related to fat? That's the core question, isn't it?
It really is. And it comes down to how these wavelengths interact with our cells. First off, this light can actually penetrate the skin.
How deep are we talking?
It depends on the wavelength and the tissue, but potentially up to, say, a couple of inches, maybe around 5 centimeters or so, enough to reach the fat layers beneath the skin.
Okay, so it gets through the skin. Then what?
Then it gets absorbed by components within our cells, specifically the mitochondria.
Ah, the mitochondria, the
Yeah.
powerhouses of the cell, right? I remember that from biology class.
Exactly. And within the mitochondria, there's a particular enzyme, cytochrome C oxidase, often just called CCO. This enzyme seems to be a key player, a primary target for this light energy.
So the light hits CCO in the mitochondria. What happens next? Is it like flipping a switch?
Kind of. When CCO absorbs the light energy, it gets activated, and that triggers a few important things almost immediately.
Okay, like what?
Well, one big one is the release of nitric oxide, NO. It seems CCO holds onto NO, and the light helps release it.
Nitric oxide, I know that's involved in blood flow, right?
It is, yes. That release can improve local circulation, but inside the cell, it also signals other things. And importantly, activating CCO also ramps up the production of ATP.
ATP, adenosine triphosphate, the cell's energy currency.
Precisely. More ATP means more energy available for cellular processes. And there's one more piece. A temporary small increase in something called reactive oxygen species, or ROS.
ROS, aren't those usually considered bad, like free radicals?
That's the common association, yeah. But in small, controlled amounts, ROS actually act as important signaling molecules within the cell. It's about balance. This transient increase seems to be part of the beneficial mechanism here.
Okay, so we've got nitric oxide released, more ATP energy, and a little burst of ROS signaling. How does that chain reaction connect to losing fat?
Good question. The increased ATP, for instance, can lead to an upregulation of other signaling molecules like CAMP. And CAMP plays a role in activating lipases.
Lipases, those are enzymes that break down fat, right? Triglycerides.
Exactly. So more ATP could lead to more CAMP, which could lead to more fat breakdown. Also, that transient ROS signal and the nitric oxide release are thought to contribute directly to sort of stressing the fat cells in a way that encourages them to release their contents or undergo natural processes of breakdown.
Huh. So it's potentially hitting fat loss from multiple angles at the cellular level. Boost energy, signal fat breakdown, maybe even help release the fat.
That seems to be the picture emerging from the research. And, to make this less theoretical, let's look at some actual studies.
Perfect. Let's dive into the evidence. What have clinical trials shown?
Well, there's an interesting conference paper from 2019. It looks specifically at fat loss using LED phototherapy, red and near-infrared light.
What was the setup?
It was a randomized controlled trial, pretty standard design. They had 55 participants split into two groups. One got the real light therapy, the other got a sham, like a placebo treatment.
And what did the actual therapy involve?
The test group used LED devices delivering red light around 660 nanometers and near-infrared light, 840 nanometer.
Okay, those wavelengths are in the range we're talking about.
Right. The intensity was 10 milliwatts per square centimeter applied over the abdomen for 30 minutes. They did this 3 times a week.
And was it just the light?
No, and this is important. They also did 30 minutes of aerobic exercise 3 times a week right after the light therapy. The whole study lasted 4 weeks.
What about the control group?
They used sham devices, so no active light, for the same 30 minutes 3 times a week, and they did the exact same exercise routine.
Got it. So the exercise was constant, the light was the variable. What were the results?
The conclusion from the paper was that the combination, the red and NIR light plus the exercise, was effective and safe for abdominal fat loss. No side effects were reported.
Effective how? What do they measure?
They looked at waist circumference and body weight, measured at the start, after 2 weeks, and at the 4-week mark.
And the numbers.
So for the entire group getting the light therapy, there was a decrease in waist circumference, about 0.7 centimeters on average. But statistically, that wasn't significant for the whole group. Weight actually went up slightly, 0.13 kilograms, also not significant.
Okay. That sounds less dramatic than maybe expected.
Well, wait. When they looked within that test group, things got more interesting.
Okay. Tell me more.
17 of the participants in the light therapy group did show a reduction in waist circumference. And get this, 3 of those individuals had a reduction of more than 4.5 centimeters. That's quite substantial.
Wow. Okay. Over 1.5 inches for those people. That's significant. What about their weight?
Those same 3 participants also saw an average weight decrease of 0.56 kilograms, so over a pound.
So for a subset of people in the active group, the results were much more pronounced.
Exactly. It suggests there might be responders and non-responders, or that maybe the effect size varies quite a bit person to person.
How did the control group compare, the ones just doing exercise with the sham light?
They had a very slight increase in waist circumference and a slight decrease in weight, but neither change was statistically significant. Basically, no real change.
Okay, that comparison makes the results in the light group, especially those 3 individuals, seem more meaningful.
It does. The researchers also noted something technical. Both the real and sham devices had the same instantaneous peak power, even if the sham didn't deliver sustained energy. They wondered if even that tiny pulse might have had some minimal effect. But it's hard to say.
Interesting nuance. But the main takeaway seems to be that adding the light therapy to exercise showed a benefit, especially for some individuals, in reducing abdominal fat. And safely, too.
Correct. And they specifically mentioned the safety of having the device right against the skin. Now, moving beyond single studies, there's also a comprehensive review from 2013 that's worth looking at. It's titled Low-Level Laser Therapy for Fat Layer Reduction.
Right, LLLT, another term for this light therapy. A review pulls together lots of data, doesn't it?
Exactly. The goal was to look across the board lab studies, human clinical trials, everything available back then on using LLT for fat reduction. They looked at the proposed mechanisms, the efficacy, the safety.
And what was the overall conclusion from pulling all that research together?
The conclusion was pretty positive. It's stated that the study suggests LLT holds potential for reducing fat and cellulite, and even for improving blood lipid profiles, and importantly, again, without significant side effects being reported.
Okay, so that broad look reinforces the potential. Did the review shed more light on how it might be working, those mechanisms we talked about earlier?
It did. It discussed several proposed mechanisms. One was the idea of creating temporary pores, like tiny openings, in the fat cells, the adipocytes.
Letting the fat leak out, essentially.
That was the theory, allowing lipids to escape the cell. Another idea mentioned involved activating something called the complement cascade, part of the immune system, which could potentially lead to adipocyte apoptosis, that's programmed cell death, and subsequent lipid release.
So more ways the light might be helping clear out fat. What about the mitochondria connection?
Yes, that was in there too. The review talked about stimulating mitochondria, leading to that increase in ATP and also CAMP. And as we discussed, higher CAMP can activate liposes, the enzymes that break down triglycerides stored inside the fat cells.
It really seems like multiple pathways might be involved. Things like insulin resistance.
That's a crucial link, and there's actually research connecting photobiomodulation to that as well. A 2020 study looked directly at this.
Okay, what did that study investigate?
It was titled Photobiomodulation Therapy Decreases Free Fatty Acid Generation and Release in Adipocytes to Ameliorate Insulin Resistance in Type 2 Diabetes. Quite a mouthful.
Whoa, okay, let's break that down. Free fatty acids and insulin resistance. What's the connection there?
Well, in conditions like type 2 diabetes, having too many free fatty acids, or FFAs, circulating in the blood, especially released from fat tissue, is known to contribute significantly to insulin resistance. Basically, the excess FFAs interfere with how well insulin works.
Right, making it harder for sugar to get into cells.
Yeah.
So what did the PBM therapy do in this study?
The study found that using photobiomodulation therapy, specifically with 635 nanometer light in this case, actually decreased the generation and release of these free fatty acids from fat cells that were made insulin resistant. They showed this in cell cultures and also in mouse models of type 2 diabetes.
So it helped reduce the problematic FFA release from fat tissue.
Exactly. And they observed that in the mice treated with the light therapy, the levels of FFAs and triglycerides in their blood plasma were reduced.
That sounds like a direct metabolic benefit. Did they figure out how the light was doing this?
Yeah.
The mechanism.
They proposed a mechanism involving those reactive oxygen species, the ROS we mentioned earlier.
Ah, the ROS are back. How they fit in here?
In this context, the PBMT promoted mitochondrial ROS generation. This ROS signal then seemed to inhibit an enzyme called PTAN and promote the activation of another one called AKT.
Okay, getting technical here. AKT activation, what does that do?
Activated AKT then inhibits another factor called FOXO1. And by inhibiting FOXO1, it reduces the expression of the enzymes responsible for lipolysis, the breakdown and release of fat as FFAs.
Wow. So light triggers ROS, which sets off a chain reaction, PTAN-FOXO1, that ultimately tells the fat cell, okay, slow down releasing those free fatty acids.
That's the proposed pathway, yes. And interestingly, they showed that if they blocked the ROS production or if they inhibited AKT, the beneficial effects of the laser therapy went away.
That really strengthens the case for that specific mechanism being involved.
It does. So the study concluded that PBMT can suppress this excessive FFA release from insulin-resistant fat cells, which helps improve insulin resistance in these diabetic mouse models. They suggested it could be a potential therapeutic strategy.
That's fascinating. It connects the light therapy not just to fat reduction, but potentially to improving a key aspect of metabolic dysfunction like insulin resistance.
Precisely. It highlights a deeper potential metabolic impact.
Okay, so we've covered quite a bit of compelling science here. Cellular mechanisms, clinical trials on fat loss, a big review, and even links to insulin resistance.
Yeah.
How does this connect back to something like MedWave?
Well, as we mentioned, MedWave uses red and near-infrared light therapy administered by professionals.
Right, the same types of wavelengths discussed in these studies.
Exactly. So the positive scientific findings we've discussed, the potential effects on fat release, cellular energy, metabolic processes like FFA, release this body of research provides the scientific context for how these wavelengths of light can interact with the body.
So while MedWave focuses clinically on pain management,
the underlying technology, the use of red and near-infrared delivered professionally, is based on the same scientific principles of photobiomodulation that these studies on fat loss and metabolic health are exploring. It's about understanding what this light energy can potentially do at a biological level.
And it's important to note, this isn't like a home-use gadget. MedWave therapy is something delivered by trained professionals in a clinical setting.
Correct. That controlled delivery is a key aspect.
Okay, this has been a really thorough deep dive. If we were to boil it down, what are the key takeaways for someone listening?
I'd say, first, there's compelling evidence that red and near-infrared light can stimulate cellular processes, things linked to fat release and better energy production in cells.
Right, the mitochondria ATP nitric oxide connection.
Second, clinical studies, while needing more research, have shown promising results reductions in waist size, for example, when PBM is combined with exercise, and potential improvements in blood lipids.
And the safety profile seems consistently good in these studies.
Yes. And third, newer research is even suggesting a role for photobiomodulation in addressing deeper metabolic issues like insulin resistance by influencing things like free fatty acid release from fat cells.
So for you listening, this deep dive hopefully gives you a shortcut to understanding the really exciting potential within photobiomodulation, specifically for weight management and maybe broader metabolic well-being. Considering everything we've discussed, could targeted light therapy, this photobiomodulation, actually become a key piece in a more holistic puzzle for achieving and maintaining metabolic health in the future?
It's a fascinating question, isn't it? What other surprising applications might the science of photobiomodulation unlock for our well-being down the road?
Definitely something to think about. Thanks for breaking down all that science.
My pleasure. It's exciting stuff.